welcome to our deep dive, everyone. Today, we're going to be applying nature's principles to human systems.
It's a really fascinating area,
Yeah.
Nature has basically had millions of years to run its own research and development lab
Right.
and come up with some really elegant solutions to so many challenges.
Yeah, and we're just starting to catch on, I think, that we can tap into that wisdom.
For sure.
We've got some really fascinating research here that we're going to be looking at
Right.
about biomimicry systems theory,
Mm.
resource management.
Mm-hmm.
And it all seems to point to this idea that nature holds the keys to solving some of our biggest problems.
Definitely, instead of trying to conquer nature, what if we tried to learn from it?
Exactly. That's what's so interesting about this whole topic.
Yeah.
So let's dive into our first section, which is biomimicry and design.
Okay.
This is all about looking to nature for inspiration to solve human design challenges.
Right.
And we've got some amazing examples here.
Yeah. One of the things that always strikes me is just nature's incredible efficiency. Like you take trees, for example.
Yeah.
They're branching patterns.
Yeah.
They're not just aesthetically pleasing.
Right.
They're also a brilliant way to maximize sunlight capture
Right.
and distribute nutrients. And it's all about, doing more with less.
And we're seeing that now with engineers starting to apply those same principles to design more efficient transportation networks
Exactly.
in our cities.
Yeah. So if we understand the principles behind a tree's branching structure,
Right.
then we can design urban transportation systems that reduce congestion
Right.
and minimize energy consumption.
Okay, cool. So that makes sense. I'm trying to remember now. I think I read something about how shark skin inspired more efficient designs for airplanes and ships.
That's like the classic example of biomimicry.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's the unique microstructure of shark skin actually reduces drag
Oh,
and turbulence in the water, which allows sharks to move through water with incredible efficiency. And engineers have been able to mimic this to create surfaces that reduce drag on airplanes, ships, even swimsuits,
oh, wow.
which leads to fuel savings and performance gains.
That's amazing. It's such a simple thing, too.
Yeah.
But it makes such a big difference. What other examples do we have? I think there was something about termite mounds in the research.
Oh, yeah. Termite mounds are another great example.
Okay.
They're able to maintain a stable internal temperature,
Right.
despite extreme fluctuations outside thanks to their ingenious ventilation systems.
Interesting.
So architects are studying these structures to design buildings
Okay.
that can passively cool themselves, reducing our reliance on air conditioning.
So instead of fighting against nature, we're working with it.
Precisely. That's the core idea behind biomimicry.
All right, so we've seen how biomimicry can lead to some really cool innovations in engineering and architecture.
Right.
But what about organizations? Can we apply nature's principles to how we structure and run businesses?
Absolutely. That's where systems thinking comes in. Organizations are a lot like ecosystems.
Mm-hmm.
They're made up of all these interconnected parts, and there are all sorts of feedback loops at play,
Yeah.
just like in a forest or a coral reef.
Right. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
How do we apply that, though, to an organization?
Well,
Where do we even begin?
the key is to understand that decisions made in one part of an organization can have ripple effects throughout the entire system.
Okay.
Just like introducing a new species into an ecosystem can have unintended consequences,
Right.
A decision made in one department
Yeah.
can impact other departments in ways that we might not even anticipate.
So we need to think about the bigger picture, the interconnectedness of everything.
Exactly. We need to be aware of the feedback loops, both positive and negative.
Yeah.
For example, a positive feedback loop in a business could be a viral marketing campaign.
Right.
That leads to exponential growth.
Yeah.
And a negative feedback loop could be customer complaints that lead to quality improvements.
So it's all about understanding how different parts of the system interact with each other.
That's right. And it's about designing organizations that are more resilient and adaptable,
Okay.
just like a healthy ecosystem.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that kind of goes back to the ideas of efficiency that we were talking about earlier.
Right.
Nature's so efficient because it can't afford to waste resources.
That's a great point. And that brings us to a crucial question. How do we manage resources?
Yeah.
Especially in a world where resources are becoming increasingly scarce.
That is a big one.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think we're going to explore in much more detail in the next part of our deep dive.
Definitely.
So stay tuned for that. Welcome back to our deep dive.
Yeah.
Last time we were talking about nature's efficiency and how we can learn from it.
Right.
And, it got me thinking about the idea of limits in nature.
Mm-hmm.
Like nature seems to have all sorts of built-in constraints.
Yeah.
So like, where do those come from and what can we learn from them?
That's a great observation. Nature does have limits, and they're not just random. They've evolved over millions of years, to ensure the long-term health and stability of ecosystems.
Right.
And one of the most fundamental concepts here is carrying capacity.
Right. We touched on that briefly in the last part.
Yeah.
Can you remind us again what carrying capacity means?
Sure.
And how it relates to this idea of limits?
So carrying capacity refers to the maximum population size that a given environment can sustainably support.
Right.
So it's essentially the point at which a population's demand for resources exceeds the environment's ability to replenish those resources.
So it's kind of like the number of people a lifeboat can safely carry
Yeah.
before it starts to sink.
That's a good analogy.
Okay.
Yeah, if you exceed the carrying capacity, the system starts to break down.
Right.
And we see this all the time in nature. For example, let's take a deer population on an island.
Okay.
At first, when there are only a few deer,
Right.
resources are plentiful and the population booms.
They've got the whole island to themselves.
Exactly. But as the population grows,
Right.
those resources become more scarce. The deer start competing with each other for food water space. Eventually, the island reaches its carrying capacity for deer.
Okay.
At that point, the population might crash or it might stabilize at a lower level
Okay.
where the number of births and deaths are roughly balanced.
So even in a seemingly, perfect setting like an island,
Right.
there are natural limits to growth.
That's right. And it's not just true for deer populations. It applies to any system that relies on finite resources,
Right.
including human societies.
Okay. That makes sense. We can't just keep growing indefinitely without consequences.
Right.
But how do we apply this understanding of carrying capacity to something as complex as a human society?
It's a challenge for sure, but I think the first step is to acknowledge that these limits exist.
Okay.
We can't just assume that we can keep extracting resources at the rate we're currently doing without eventually facing some serious consequences.
Right. We need to find ways to manage our resources more sustainably, but where do we start?
One approach is to look to nature for inspiration.
Okay.
Nature has developed some incredibly efficient ways to use and reuse resources.
Okay.
For example, in a forest,
Yeah.
the waste from one organism becomes food for another. There's very little that goes to waste.
Right. It's all about closing the loop.
Exactly. That's the core principle behind the circular economy. Instead of the linear take, make, dispose model that we've been using for so long, we need to start designing products and systems that minimize waste and maximize resource utilization.
So we need to think about the entire life cycle of a product.
Yeah.
From where its raw materials come from to what happens to it at the end of its useful life.
Precisely. Imagine a world where plastic packaging is designed to be completely biodegradable, or can be easily turned back into new packaging.
Right.
Or where electronic devices are designed to be modular so you can easily upgrade or replace components instead of throwing away the entire device.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. It's all about shifting our mindset from a linear to a circular way of thinking.
Right.
But this sounds like a huge undertaking.
Is.
Are there any companies that are actually doing this successfully?
There are actually quite a few companies that are embracing the circular economy. One great example is Interface,
Okay.
a company that makes carpet tiles. They've shifted to a circular economy approach where their carpet tiles are designed to be easily disassembled and recycled.
Wow.
And they've even implemented a program to reclaim old carpet tiles from customers so nothing goes to waste.
That's impressive. Are there any other examples?
Another interesting example is Patagonia, the outdoor clothing company.
Okay.
They've been pioneers in sustainable practices for years. They encourage their customers to repair their clothes instead of throwing them away, and they offer a repair service for their products.
Wow.
They've also implemented a program where customers can trade in their old Patagonia clothes for credit towards new purchases.
Oh, wow.
And those clothes are then repaired and resold through their WarnWear program.
So they're actually making money by embracing these sustainable practices.
Exactly. They're proving that sustainability and profitability aren't mutually exclusive.
Right.
In fact, they often go hand in hand.
Okay, so we've got these inspiring examples of companies embracing the circular economy.
Yes.
But what about on a personal level? What can we do as individuals to live more sustainably? Especially considering this idea of limits that we've been talking about.
That's a great question, and it's one that I think a lot of people are grappling with these days. We all have a role to play in creating a more sustainable future.
Right.
And it starts with understanding our own impact on the planet. We need to become more mindful of our consumption habits, and we need to be willing to make changes to our lifestyles.
So we need to be more conscious of what we buy,
Yeah.
how much we use,
Right.
and how we dispose of things.
Exactly. Ask yourself, do I really need this?
Right.
Or am I just buying it because it's on sale or because everyone else has one?
Mhm.
It's also important to support companies that are committed to sustainability. Vote with your dollars by choosing products that are made with recycled materials or that come from companies that are using renewable energy sources.
So it's not just about individual actions. It's about making conscious choices
Yeah,
that send a message to businesses that we care about sustainability.
that's right. And it's about being willing to challenge the status quo.
Yeah.
We've been living in a culture of excess for so long that it can be hard to imagine living any other way. But I think deep down we all know that something needs to change.
We can't just keep consuming more and more without consequences.
Exactly. We need to start thinking about what it means to live within our ecological means.
Right.
We need to find a way to balance our needs with the needs of the planet, and I think nature can teach us a lot about how to do that.
But it seems like we've reached a natural stopping point for this part of our deep dive.
Yeah.
But I'm already feeling inspired to make some changes in my own life. What
Yeah.
about you?
Me too. It's always encouraging to see how many people are working towards a more sustainable future. And it's exciting to think about all the possibilities that lie ahead.
In the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore some specific steps that we can all take to embrace a more sustainable lifestyle, drawing inspiration from nature's wisdom. Join us next time as we continue our exploration. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive. In the previous parts, we talked about biomimicry, systems thinking, and even got into the circular economy.
Right.
Now I'm really curious to hear more about those inspiring companies that you mentioned
Yeah.
that are embracing these ideas.
It's really heartening to see how many businesses are taking these principles to heart,
Yeah,
and integrating them into their actual practices.
right.
These aren't just idealistic concepts anymore. They're becoming real-world solutions.
Exactly. It feels like things are really starting to shift,
Yeah.
and businesses are realizing that sustainability isn't just good for the planet.
Right.
It's good for their bottom line, too.
Absolutely. Let's revisit Interface.
Okay. The carpet tile company that we talked about?
Yeah.
They've fully embraced the circular economy, designing their tiles for disassembly and recycling.
Right.
They even have a program to take back old tiles from customers, ensuring that nothing goes to waste.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
It seems like they've really thought through every step of their process
They have.
to minimize their impact.
And they're not alone. Patagonia, the outdoor clothing company, also stands out.
Okay.
They've been promoting sustainable practices for years, encouraging repairs over replacements, and even offering a trade-in program for old clothes.
Right.
Their Worn Wear program gives those clothes a second life.
It's inspiring to see these companies leading the way and showing that sustainability can be profitable.
Right.
It's like they're proving that you don't have to choose between doing good for the planet
Yeah.
and doing well as a business.
It's about finding that sweet spot where those two goals align.
And the more companies that adopt these practices, the more it'll become the norm rather than the exception.
So we've talked about these big companies making significant changes, but
Yeah.
what about those of us who aren't CEOs or designers? What can we do
Right.
in our everyday lives to embrace these principles and live more sustainably?
That's the crucial question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It all starts with awareness, understanding our own impact on the planet, and making conscious choices in our daily lives.
So, like, what kind of things are we talking about?
It can be as simple as asking ourselves, do I really need this, before making a purchase?
Right.
Or opting for reusable products instead of disposable ones?
So it's about breaking free from that more is better mentality
Exactly.
that's so ingrained in our culture.
And it's about finding joy in experiences rather than material possessions.
Mm-hmm.
Spending time in nature, connecting with loved ones, pursuing creative passions. Those are the things that truly enrich our lives.
It's about shifting our focus from consumption
Right.
to connection, connecting with ourselves, with each other, and with the natural world.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And remember, even small actions can make a big difference when we all do them collectively.
Right. It's about recognizing that we're all part of this interconnected web of life.
Yes,
And that our actions have ripple effects.
precisely. And as we wrap up our deep dive, I want to emphasize that this journey of learning from nature is an ongoing one.
Yeah.
There's always more to discover and new ways to apply these principles to our lives.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. It feels like we've only just scratched the surface of what's possible
No, right.
when we start looking to nature for guidance.
Absolutely. There's a whole world of wisdom out there just waiting to be explored. So let's keep learning, keep experimenting, and keep striving to create a future that's in harmony with the natural world.
That's a perfect note to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
And we hope you'll continue exploring these ideas in your own lives.